You are now listening to The Unwavering, the movement dedicated to educating and empowering the brave men and women who have or are still serving our great nation. What's up, everyone? Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Unwavering. Today we have a unique experience to talk to fellow co-host Dan about his time in the Navy and some of the things he experienced. But before we go ahead and begin, as always, I want to say a huge thank you to our military force, to all the members of the Army, the Air Force, Marine Corps, Navy, and Coast Guard. Thank you so much for everything that you guys do. And for the families that are out there supporting them, thank you, because you guys are just as important to us being able to accomplish our mission. So huge thank you to you guys. At this time, we'll go ahead and transfer the mic over to Dan and let him introduce himself for those of you who have not had the privilege of meeting him yet.
Hey everyone, I'm Dan. As Kevin already mentioned, I spent some time in the Navy, 5 years, and that unique experience that he was mentioning is joining the Submarine Force. 4 of those 5 years on the submarine. I left the Navy in 2017, so I'm pretty excited today to talk about what went on underwater.
So you went from working under the surface to outer space.
That's right.
Are there aliens underwater?
Actually, that's where all the aliens are. Everyone has this misconception that they're in space, but we've been keeping them locked down there for quite some time.
So it's like the Legion of Doom?
They kicked me out of it. I didn't separate from the Navy. They said, not evil enough. Anyway, so I figure we'll start this off with just talking about how I got into the submarine force and how someone would go about joining the submarine force. First of all, the sub force is completely voluntary. You don't have to be on a submarine if you don't want to, which I think a lot of people don't know. They join the military and they think like, oh, they're going to put me where they want to put me. But if you don't want to be on a submarine, you don't have to be on a submarine. So my background is I grew up in Connecticut, right by Groton, Connecticut, which is known as the submarine capital of the world because they have one of the biggest submarine bases on the East Coast is in Groton, Connecticut. And then also a place where they build all the submarines is literally right next to the Groton, New London submarine base. So growing up, I would say maybe a quarter of the friends I had, their parents worked at Electric Boat building all the submarines and stuff. So I had a bit of an introduction to the submarine force before ever actually joining. So I grew up in that area. I ended up going to college in that area, University of Connecticut. And throughout my time in college, I was working at a car wash, actually, which is pretty interesting. But anyways, the owner of the car wash was a ex-submarine officer. So I always had him kind of in the background saying, hey, you should look into this. So eventually I was working at the car wash. I graduated college and I decided that, okay, I think a good career path might be to join the Navy. So I went down to the recruiting office and I talked with them for a little bit and said, well, what are you really looking to do? And I said, I want to be on a submarine. And everybody in the recruiting office just kind of looked at me like I was some sort of idiot. like, why would you want to be on a submarine? And I mean, growing up there and hearing so much about it, I heard all this good stuff. So I was like, yeah, I want to be on a submarine. That sounds fun. So they're like, yeah, not a problem. Normally we have to convince people to try to be on a submarine. If you want to do that, let's go. But first thing is you have to qualify for it. So you have to take your regular ASVAB and everything. And you have to have a high enough score to do certain jobs on the submarine. So I went in and I took my ASVAB and I ended up doing really well. And you're pretty much away from your recruiter at that time. And you go over to it's kind of like a detailer. Someone who really sits down with you and says, these are the jobs that are open to you. Which one do you want? So I scored really high and I went over to that guy and he sat me down and he looked at me. He's like, you pretty much have anything open. Take your pick and I'll tell you if it's available. But it looks like for the most part it is. And I looked at him like, I want to be on a submarine. And the guy again looked at me like, you're a freaking idiot. And I could see that moment on his face where he's like, what did you just say? Like, you idiot. But then also realizing that the opportunity that was sitting in front of him. So he was like, okay, no problem. So I ended up signing up as a submarine nuclear person. And so it was May, I think, of 2012. And they were like, okay, you're going to go to boot camp in October. And I was like, what is this stuff? I'm joining the Navy. I want to go like right away. I don't want to sit around all summer. I went home and that was the plan. October, I go to boot camp. And then about a week later, I got a call from my recruiter and they're like, hey, we got opportunity for you to leave and go join the submarine force and leave at the end of next month, which would have been June. And I'm like, nice, dude, let's do it. And he's like, one small change, you're no longer being in the nuclear field. You're going to go over to what's called SECF, which is submarine electronics computer field. So there's a couple jobs that you could get into with that one. And I was like, okay, whatever. That sounds good. So he's like, sweet, I'll give you some more information about when you leave. And like at this point, I think it was the first week of June. And I got called back like the next day. And he's like, hey, man, you leave at the end of the week. So I went from leaving a couple of months to leaving at the end of the week. So I had to quit my job and try to tie up all those loose ends real quick. Next part of the submarine experience is pretty similar to any other military experience. I went to boot camp. I did my thing. Depending on what kind of job you have on the submarine, they send you to your different schools. The nuclear qualified people, they go to, I think, New York or North Carolina, and they have, I think, a year or two of school. It's pretty intense for them. They have to learn all about the reactor and all that good stuff, far beyond what I had. My field, computer electronics, went to Groton, Connecticut, which, like I said, is where I'm pretty much from. And I stayed there for about a year. Cooks go to like a basic enlisted submarine school for a month or two. Weapons guys go for a little bit longer, but they're also in Connecticut. Pretty much everyone goes through Connecticut except the nuclear people. So I did my schooling. It really wasn't that bad. You learn about stuff that's like at least somewhat interesting. But one thing that happened while I was there pretty early on is they took all of us in the SECF field and they said, okay, it's time to pick your jobs. And they said, there's 4 categories pretty much. You can be navigation, you can be radioman, you can do sonar, or you can do fire control, which is like launching weapons. And they sat down and they told us a little bit about each. And they said like sonar and fire control, those are like generally the coolest ones that they can pitch. But realistically, your jobs outside of the Navy aren't all that prevalent. They said the radioman, there's a little bit you can work on like communication stuff pretty easily. There's quite a bit of opportunity because they also are like security experts on the submarine. So there's a lot of, I guess, security jobs as well. They got to navigation. They said, this is the hardest job. You'll be working all these shitty hours. Nobody actually wants to be navigation, although there are fantastic job opportunities when you get out. And so they sat everyone down and they said, write down your top 3. So I, of course, put navigation as my number 1 because I'm like,
every time they told you that something was going to be shitty or nobody volunteers for it, you were the first one to volunteer.
I was really trying to punish myself for something. I still haven't figured that out yet, what it was. But no, I saw navigation and they said you're going to be working all these crazy hours. You're going to hate your life for a couple of years, but you're going to have these great opportunities when you get out and you're going to learn a lot. And I looked at that. I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn a whole lot. That's something I want to do. My whole idea of joining the Navy was I'm going to make sure I get more out of the Navy than the Navy gets out of me. I am going to become so much better. I mean, I'm going to provide the Navy with the service and do everything they ask, but I'm going to make sure it's worth my time. So I signed up for navigation and I went to the school, and then towards the end of the schooling, they sat everyone down and they said, okay, we want you to put your top 3 choices for submarine bases to go to. They'll get like a list of orders. Say there's 20 people in the class. They'll pretty much give the class 20 blank orders. And then based on where you said you wanted to go and your ranking in the class, based on like the tests and stuff, they'll assign you a submarine in a home port that you may or may not want. I think I was 4th in the class. I think there was like 30 of us in the class. So I did relatively well. Really, I just paid attention and did the work. You always have those people who join the military and they don't really have any ambition for it. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, those people that go and they just like do the bare minimum.
Yeah. Well, I feel like a couple of those people get tricked into submarine force. So we had our fair share in the class. And put Guam, and then I put San Diego, then I put Hawaii, trying to get real tropical there. I ended up being sent to Hawaii. Pretty awesome. I got sent to the USS Buffalo. Little did I know it at the time, that was probably my best choice. Which is funny because the guy who was 3rd in the class put Hawaii as his number 1 choice, and he got sent to Guam. So, just like nothing ever works quite as they plan it in the military, especially in the sub force. It gets a little bit more interesting in the story. Hope a couple of the listeners survive through that boring start. I got sent to the USS Buffalo, which was a fast attack submarine. There's kind of three types. There's the fast attacks, which generally go out and they go on mission. They go out there and they gather data. Sometimes they do like freedom of navigation missions where they just kind of surface and go through like a contested area. So that's kind of like the job of a fast attack. It's like intelligence gathering and really tracking other Navy's vessels. The other main type is called boomer. They call them like nuclear submarines, I guess. I guess they're all nuclear, but it's boomer. And they are for strategic deterrence. They usually have nuclear weapons on them, and they go out into the middle of the ocean for months at a time and turn circles. And if another country decides to launch nukes at us, they pop up and launch their nukes at them, so it assures mutual destruction. It's kind of shitty, but it stops other countries from trying to destroy us. And then the last group, I don't really know too much about. They're called the Seawolf class. There's only three of them. There's the Seawolf, the Jimmy Carter, and the USS Connecticut. And they're like a special projects boat. From what I've heard, they do like a lot of really cool, interesting stuff, like seal extractions, kind of like the really high profile missions that you never hear about. But yeah, like I said, I don't really have much experience with them. I went to a fast attack, USS Buffalo, and I was blessed with the opportunity to get there when it was in shipyard. So I was there for my first year while the boat was completely torn apart. The ventilation system in it was out. There wasn't a single bed in there. Like, we had a barge that we slept on and stuff. So this thing was torn up completely. Reactor shut down. Like, there was holes cut in the side of the hull that people would use to get in and out of the submarine. Like, yeah, like the pressure vessel that you're going to be relying later on, like to keep you alive. There was holes in it that I could just walk through, and I did walk through it.
It's funny that you say that. Sorry to interrupt, but it's funny that you say that because actually before I joined the Marine Corps, both myself and actually Kenny, we worked for my dad, and my dad worked as a steel preservationist. So he sandblasted and painted naval vessels down in Coronado and San Diego area. Yeah. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about when they bring those ships into the dry dock and they're ripping out huge chunks, whether it's like a carrier, whether it's a destroyer, they're ripping out huge sections of it that need to be repaired. And so, yeah, I remember distinctly like seeing holes in the side of a ship that forklifts were driving through. And I'm like, what the hell?
You know, I mean, it's the same for like surface vessels. They're going out to sea. A lot of those cuts in their hull are going to be below the waterline. That's a major problem if one isn't a good weld or something. But anyways, your first year on the submarine is usually trying to get qualified. They give you 9 months, so a year is a bit of an exaggeration. And the submarine qualification process is intense. I would say 75% of them make it through. You basically are given a qualification card, and you have to sit down and go through each one of these qualifications, and each one is about a different system on the submarine. So you have anywhere from learning how the torpedo tubes work, to learning how the radio communications work, to the nuclear reactor, to propulsion systems, everything. You need to be able to be relied upon by everyone in the crew to perform any job. I had to go through all that, and I qualified on the submarine. It's called Getting Your Fish or Getting Your Dolphins. It's your warfare device. I qualified in July or late June of 2013, so at about the 9-month mark. And it just so happens that the date that I qualified, we had just gotten out of shipyard and was just going out to sea. And because we were in such like a long shipyard period, a lot of the people who had experience going out to sea had left and were replaced by people who had no experience. So when we went out to sea for the first time for sea trials, it's called, we probably had a crew that was 75% never having gone out to sea.
Holy crap.
Doing jobs that they've never done before. And so it was just like, what the hell? Being navigation, my job as a junior navigation guy was a fathometer operator, which is like a safety of ship job. It's pretty important. Basically, what a fathometer is this acoustic device that sends a signal down to the bottom of the ocean. The signal reflects, comes back up to the submarine, and it tells you how deep to the bottom of the ocean is. So it like makes sure you don't run into the ground, but you can also kind of tell your depth off of that as well. If you know how deep the water is based off the chart and you know the depth of water below you, you can kind of figure out how deep you are if needed. We have a lot of other ways to do that though. So yeah, that was my first experience on the submarine. I was safety of ship guy. Like, we were operating in shallow water because when you're going through these sea trials, if for some reason something goes wrong, you want to go to the bottom of the ocean and be able to be saved. You don't want to like sink in an area where your submarine's going to implode and everyone's going to die, especially with like a 75% crew that's never been out to sea. They're all green. So we did that. Everything went fine. I got my fish.
Before we go on, I just want to elaborate on that because that's one thing that I think the Navy does an excellent job of. Each military branch obviously does things differently, right? Like the Marine Corps, they teach all of us, hey, you're a rifleman before you're an avionics technician or before you're motor T, whatever your primary job is. So for you being navigation, that was your primary job. But before that, you do have to learn enough about each section of the ship where if something were to happen, you could fill that void. When I was on the ship, that was one thing that I experienced too. Some of the Navy counterparts that I was working with, they were always studying and always bouncing around to different sections of the ship for like 3 to 4 months at a time. And I'm like, hey, you were just over here. Why are you over here now? And they're like, oh, I'm studying for this test so I can earn my pin. And I was like,
yeah, we're in that job.
Yeah, so that's absolutely crucial. And I think that's probably why we do have such a successful military forces, because they teach us to do less with more. You have one person who can take over for you, do navigation or learn how to man torpedo tubes, whatever it is. Having people to fall in behind you and fill those voids, I think, is crucial. So it's just really cool.
Yeah, they understand the value of like cross training for sure.
Yeah.
Anyways, so you do bring up a good point. While I was doing all that qualification stuff for getting my warfare device, I was also doing training for my job as well. I went well beyond fathometer operator in my time. I had to be qualified land tech, which is kind of deceiving, the name, because I was responsible for the communications systems inside, like the local area network, right? LAN, like internet inside the submarine. But my job as a land tech was more like maintaining the battery and ventilation system on the submarine.
Which is
a lot of people don't realize
important.
that there's a battery on a submarine.
Yeah, they think it's all nuclear, but
yeah. What happens when the reactor goes out? How are we going to do anything? We got a big battery. Crawling down there was like the only time I ever got sick on the submarine too. We were transiting out of Pearl Harbor, and the seas were a little bit rough. And they do this thing called a battery charge periodically. I don't know exactly how often. To do it, you have to, it's basically like a bunch of car batteries that are really deep. And if you're going to charge it off the reactor, you have to go down there and like check all the electrolyte levels in all of them. And it's in like this really confined space, and you actually have to crawl on top of all the batteries. Like you're laying on top of all of them, and there's maybe 3 feet, not even, maybe 2 feet above you until it's like the floor of the next level. And so you have to crawl down there, and you get your flashlight and you have your mirror. You also have like a tool that checks like the specific gravity of the electrolyte, and you go down and you're given, can't even remember, like maybe 3 dozen batteries that are going to be like a sample of the overall health of the battery, like the overall structure of battery.
Right.
And so you go down there and you unscrew the cap and you stick your mirror in there and you make sure that the bubbles are going inside there, the electrolyte is flowing, you take your readings of it and you look around for any like debris or anything. And meanwhile, the ship is rocking and the electrolyte's spilling all over you, and it's freaking battery acid. You're getting burned. And so it would like screw up your uniform. It would eat your uniform away. And I had to do this like pretty often because not a lot of people were qualified to do it.
And of course, you always volunteered for the things that people
yeah,
didn't want
to do. Yeah, of course, I was like, oh yeah, I'll go down and do that. So, I mean, it was kind of a good deal sometimes. But I did it when we were transiting out of Pearl Harbor, and the waves were pretty bad, and it was super warm down there, and it was rocking like crazy, and I was getting electrolyte all over the place. And I remember just feeling so bad, and I finally got done with taking all the measurements, and I crawl out of the battery well, and I just laid down on the floor, like right outside the battery well. I'm like, I'm going to puke. This is awful. And like people are like walking by me, and they know what I was doing, so they're just kind of like laughing at me and just like going by like freaking idiot. Like, that was really the only time I got sick on the submarine.
That's actually one thing I wanted to talk to you about, was what it's actually like living on the ship and living in such confined areas. Because from my experience on the ship, and I was on a LHD, I was on the Bonhomme Richard, and I was only there for a month or a month and a half. And I'm not going to lie. I did not enjoy it. It wasn't that, the ship made me feel that way, right? I think it was just the fact that I was in such a confined space and,
Yeah.
we're in racks or beds that are stacked 3 to 4 high. You have some people that you don't know that maybe grew up or were brought up differently. They're walking around barefoot. They're like farting.
Yeah. Oh,
They're
yeah.
just like completely inconsiderate of your personal space. So for me, like, one, it was my first deployment. Two, it was people that, in my opinion, were just absolutely inconsiderate, and it drove me nuts, dude. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember just trying to sleep, and I worked the night shift too. So I remember I was sleeping, and I can hear when they would drop the chains, and it just echoes throughout the entire ship. So you're not getting good sleep. Like, you have people who are taking care of their personal business in the middle of the night, like just all sorts of crazy stuff. And you're like, dude,
Yeah,
I just want
sure.
sleep,
There's for sure a lot of challenges. Do you want to start off by saying, like, living on a submarine and like serving on a submarine isn't all bad. Like, there's a lot of good out of it. There's a lot of awesome experiences I had, awesome stuff I learned, but with that was a lot of challenges. Hot racking is common on a submarine, especially on a fast attack. I'm not sure about a boomer.
What is that?
Hot racking is basically 3 people to 2 beds, and you sleep in shifts. So at one time, there's always one bed open. Well, I wouldn't say there's always one bed open because sometimes people are kind of scumbags. But there should be one bed open at all times. At any one time, someone should be in the rack sleeping. One person should be up on watch doing their job. Another person should be up either cleaning or exercising or doing secondary work. So that's kind of interesting. You're sharing a bed, and it like rotates which ones you're in, unless you're pretty good at like scheming other people like I was, where I could pretty often get my own rack.
Wait, so like you guys, so if there were 3 people sharing a bed, obviously they're not in at the same time, but you're still sharing the same sheets, the same...
No.
Okay.
You have your own sheets.
Okay.
You have your own sheets. Yeah.
All right.
Sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, dude, that is so grimy.
Yeah,
Like, that's
gross.
terrible.
I mean, some people did share sheets. Like, some people were fine with that because it's kind of a pain in the butt every day to, like, when you want to go to sleep, you have to make your bed. And, like, the berthing area is super small and confined. Racks are stacked 3 high. If you have the top rack, like, making your bed is extremely difficult if you're short. It's always dark in there. The lights are never on. So, like, you're kind of trying to make your bed somewhat in the dark in this tight area. So that's why I like to have my own rack. I didn't have to make my bed every time. I would volunteer to sleep in the torpedo room just so I didn't have to hot rack. There was like the smoke bit in the torpedo room where people would go and they'd smoke. They only did like e-cigarettes because you can't really smoke regular cigarettes on a submarine. It's kind of dangerous. But they would take a torpedo and they would strap a metal plate to it, and then they would strap like this little bed frame to it and put a mattress on it, and that's where I slept. I like probably
again volunteering to do things that no one else wants to do. So you were next to where they launch projectiles from.
Yeah, I slept on top of a torpedo.
I don't even think the listeners...
That's kind of crazy, but it was comfortable. I mean, they gave me a mattress and everything. The only thing that people didn't like about it was that it was usually pretty loud down there, but I just slept through it. It didn't bother me. It's funny because I would sleep like right next to the smoke pit where people are laughing and like yelling at each other, and I would just sleep through it. But the second like a alarm went off on that submarine, I would be like out of the rack,
completely dressed, ready to go
within a second.
Yep.
Like I would like wake up immediately. It's just, I don't know, like programmed into your head. Just you hear this alarm sound, you better be going. And so
yeah, for sure, it was the same way for us. The loudest thing was probably them dropping anchor. Since I was so low underneath the flight deck, I couldn't really hear the Harriers or the helicopters. That didn't affect me, but you're right. I could sleep through a lot of those things. I could sleep through people, arguing or laughing, watching movies. But as soon as I heard the alarm go off, it was like instant. I had my flight suit on. I was ready to go. It was pretty crazy. And it was everyone too.
Fire,
yeah.
So getting back to like what you said, like, is it weird being in a confined space? Yeah. I mean, showers had to be limited. I could only take a shower every like 2 or 3 days, and it could only be for like 3 minutes. That kind of sucked, but you get through it. Everyone stinks, so whatever. There's only so many toilets. Luckily, they do a pretty good job of keeping them clean. And that's everyone who cleans them. Like, I would clean toilets as well. But that was always a challenge. Like, if you had to use the bathroom, especially after, like, a meal was over, everyone's running to the bathroom and stuff. The food was usually pretty good, but the cafeteria area, the mess hall it's called, is only so big. So you had to cycle through. You basically got your food, sat down, ate as fast as you could, and got out. So there was a lot of, like, challenges. But we did a lot of really cool stuff. So, I mean, just to wrap it up, if you guys want to ask me any questions about like any of the cool stuff I did, I'll see if I can answer some of them.
I definitely want to touch more on this subject and get into what life was like on board the submarine, because it's unique to be able to talk to someone with that experience. Not everyone is as willing to join the submarine force like you alluded to earlier. So
I would say ignorant.
No, but I mean, it taught you a lot of good stuff, so it was completely worth it. But thank you so much, and I'm sorry that we have to come to such an abrupt end, but I think we covered a really good section of what it's like, and I know it's going to lead to some questions in the future. So
yeah, hopefully that was somewhat interesting.
Yeah, no, that was good. So yeah, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it. And for all you guys who want to learn more about Dan and kind of his time in the military, we will be doing future episodes. So thank you.
Send the questions, and then maybe I can answer them on the air.
Awesome. All right, sounds good. Thanks, buddy.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Unwavering. Please rate and comment on Apple Podcasts. Give us a 5-star and a great comment, and we may just read it on a future episode. Also, follow us on social platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Be sure to check back with us next week.